Envelop for Live is known as a set of Max for Live devices that extend the capabilities of Ableton Live into the Ambisonics domain. But it's actually much more than that. It's also a community of artists. It's a venue in San Francisco. And on top of everything, it is one of the main reasons why I started this channel, because that's how I got into immersive audio. So I felt it is a good idea to start the year 2024 with a conversation with Mark Slee, who is the developer of Envelop for Live and one of the masterminds of the Envelop community. The following is a significantly shortened version of a discussion that Sam Hawken and I had with Mark Slee on our podcast channel, Spatial Audio Monthly. I'm going to leave a link to that episode in the description below. And with that being said, let's turn it over to Mark Slee. We have a very interesting guest today, Mark Slee from Envelop for Life, and actually he is partly responsible for why this podcast exists, and I'm going to talk about that in a second. But Mark, do you want to say something about yourself? What you do and who you are?
Yeah, thank you for having me. My name's Mark Slee. I'm a software engineer, artist, musician, DJ, bit of a mix of things, but primarily, as you mentioned, in this context, the lead developer of Envelop for Live. I also work on some spatial visualization software for LEDs that goes by the name of LX Studio or Chromatic. My background is technical, computer science and math, but have throughout my life always been DJing, producing electronic music in parallel. So really enjoyed just sort of bouncing between those two roles, creating tools and then going, having a good time using them.
Not everybody might be aware of what Envelop for Life really is. So my first question to Mark would be, what exactly is Envelop for Life?
Yeah, so Envelop for Live is a set of tools that runs on Max for Live within Ableton that makes it easy to use Ableton as an environment to do Ambisonics-based spatial panning and spatial music. So the suite includes basic panning devices, some convolution reverb, another couple utility reverbs, some kind of basic routing tools, and a few sort of effects. So it's kind of a sort of core, nothing super wacky, but basic sort of core package to have working with spatial audio feel natural within Ableton.
And I just realized that I pronounced it incorrectly. How did you pronounce? I always say...
this is... You're not the only one. We say envelop.
Envelop, okay. Well, thank you.
The verb, to be enveloped
to envelop.
by sound.
Honestly, that makes a lot more sense.
Not an envelope in which one mails things, but yeah.
Yeah, that's funny.
We knew from the start that was going to be a constant... mispronunciation. It's quite all right.
So okay, well now I have to relearn. That's kind of the weird thing. You guys have been around for quite some time, I think, right?
Yeah, probably. I was trying to check because I couldn't remember. I think we're coming up on 10 years almost. I think we're not quite there, but I want to say the first software release was maybe around 2015, somewhere thereabouts.
Yeah, and that brings me to kind of what I said at the beginning, kind of why kind of what you do is actually kind of the reason why I am here. So a couple of years ago, I decided I needed something to do when I'm retiring, and I felt music production, and I purchased Ableton, and then essentially I came across Envelop for Life, and that got me really excited because as a mathematician, Ambisonics is something that I could actually relate to. So Envelop really is the main reason that brought me into spatial audio, and that's something I'm really grateful for. So that's really cool. Now you guys
that's cool to hear that, actually, because we're super grateful for all these videos you've made, and I think for a while you were making them, and I don't know if you had reached out to anyone on the team, because I feel like I didn't know about them and then discovered them one day, and we were just we're like, oh wow, someone's making these really great.
I'm constantly saying that kind of I'm a little bit socially awkward, so I usually don't reach out to people. But I don't think I've ever reached out to anybody. No, I just make stuff.
Well, I'm glad you've done it now, because they're extremely helpful videos, and some of the most, more comprehensive than any of the documentation we've done ourselves.
Really, well, thank you. So, but one thing that I think that makes your stuff really interesting is also you follow a particular philosophy. Essentially, kind of everything that you do is available for free to some extent, right? Is there can you tell us a little bit about that? Essentially, first of all, how came that to be, and how did you decide to make that available? And what was the reason why you kind of decided to go that route? Because there are a couple of other systems that actually charge sometimes a lot of money for these types of things, and your stuff is essentially free.
Yeah, I think so. Envelop for Live is the set of tools, E4L, and then there's the larger Envelop organization, which is a nonprofit organization started out of and still mostly based in San Francisco. So I think the whole sort of philosophy from the beginning was this nonprofit approach of just wanting to support spatial audio, make it more accessible, bring people together around shared listening experiences and the impact of that. And then so there's a few things that Envelop, the organization, does to kind of foster and enable that. So Envelop for Live is one piece of that, which is the tools. And a couple of reasons for open source. One was that we were using a lot of open source components, some of which I think may have been, I can't remember if they were GPL to begin with, which effectively forces you to also be GPL if you're going to use it.
That's true.
Some may have been, some may have not. But I think that resonated with us anyway, because I think part of the idea was to sort of try to be an alternative to the more established, either sort of Dolby cinema-oriented systems, or, as you were just talking about with plugins, I think the sort of high-end post-production market. We were sort of thinking, okay, there is definitely hobbyist interest in this, and and just sort of culturally the different approach to it, which is, not big project post-production, but experimental electronic music. There's such a history of that in so many, the West Coast Synth School and all these other things that cut just that sort of ethos of messing around and seeing what happens. I think we were interested in sort of supporting that kind of just experimental approach to it. So it started open source. We've kept it open source since. Envelop then does also operate a venue in San Francisco where we have a multi-channel system and operate events. Those are ticketed events and things like that. So E4L sort of fits in a larger overall Envelop project. But I think we would love to see it be easier for people to get into the content production funnel. There's always such a chicken and egg problem with spatial audio that there's just not enough content. And then there's always this question for artists, well, why should they invest in all these expensive tools and all the effort and time to produce this content if there's not a huge number of places to present it? So we're sort of trying to approach different sides of that sort of simultaneously, both through creating the listening spaces and trying to encourage pop-up events and that kind of thing, but then also, just making the content production easy.
I'm curious about tell us a little bit more about your space that you have. You guys are located in San Francisco, right? So that's your primary. Are there any other locations, or is this the only location that you operate?
That is the only location, the only permanent location. There was briefly one in Salt Lake City that kind of developed out of a mobile system that's not operating anymore. And then we have the permanent location in San Francisco. That is a 32 channel system. It's a 28.4. You've probably seen images on the website. I'll describe it for those listening, but we kind of go with this approach of using these columns. So we have 8 columns forming an octagon that envelops the audience, shall we say. The columns are about 12 feet tall. So we have within each column, we have a head height speaker around 6 feet, and then we have a floor speaker pointing upwards, and then an overhead angled down from about 12 feet. That the ring of 8 is kind of our core thing with all the systems we do. So our mobile pop-up system is just an octagon at head height with 8 speakers. But then in that permanent venue, we add an extra ring of sort of 4 overheads right up on the ceiling, plus subs. So that is a room that holds, our capacity is just around 50 people sort of max. So it's an intimate space, cozy room. And we do a mix there of different programming types. We do some live performance or DJ'd performance. We do some just listening events with pre-recorded, pre-spatialized material, sometimes source material that was in surround, Pink Floyd album, that sort of thing, other times upmixed content. that we've translated. And then some events are more sort of sound bath meditation session type of thing, where a lot of field recordings, this kind of more sort of ambient soundscape. So a mix of experiences in there.
And that is meant to be used with the Envelop system only, or do you kind of also kind of support other spatial audio systems?
We pretty much, I mean, we're operating those events, so it's basically always we're running it off Envelop. In theory, I think we're not opposed to someone coming and doing something else, but most the events in there tends to be us operating them. So it's just that's where we got
and kind of that is this a space where anybody can contribute, or kind of how does this work? Is this something that you
no,
yeah.
Not quite. It's part of a larger venue. We're sort of one room in a larger venue that includes a very large multi-thousand-person concert venue. And then they also have like a nightclub that I forget exact capacity, maybe 300, 500 type of people. And then they have this room. So the larger space does a whole mix of programming. So unfortunately, we don't have a huge amount of control over like overall scheduling. We would love to at some point be able to do more daytime programming and sort of educational stuff, studio sessions, that sort of thing. But yeah, no, we are, I mean, we do a mix of community events and things. So we have parties and concerts sometimes that'll be from other local collectives or producers doing things. It's hard to make the economics of sort of bringing people in from afar work with a 50-person venue. It's just can't bring enough people through the door. So it's mostly local stuff. But we would love to. Our sort of vision for the arc of it, the hope would be to kind of build a community around the sort of format and standard. And ideally, I think that's also part of the vision with the free software is that it would be great to get to a point where there's a venue of some sort like this in most major cities that could exchange content and how someone could produce something and present it and have there be either synchronized live event where it's presented simultaneously in multiple places, or just federated where, okay, I've produced this, I can go present it in 5 or 10 different venues in different cities rather than a one-off. Because yeah, I think, and that's part of why Ambisonics, because I think the sort of theoretical portability of it is useful there, where you haven't the artist has not produced something that is channel based for a very specific one-off venue that happens to have XYZ speaker layout. Our hope is that, of course, you always need to tune spatial audio for the room. Like when you go to it's not going to sound exactly the same in a different room with different speaker layout, but at least the hope is with Ambisonics, the distance to tune it to a new venue should be a lot lower.
Yeah. How's that normally played? Are they using kind of a live type setup, even in Ableton maybe, or is it kind of a pre-recorded?
Yeah, no, most of the time we are playing it out of Ableton using E4L in real time. So that's the majority. That's the common use case. We do in some of our Macs, we have a mechanism to just capture the output, of course, as a multi-channel wave if we just want to bake it. But typically it's run directly off E4L.
Oh, cool. Yeah, because that's always the challenge with like the processing and any latency, and what you're hearing isn't necessarily exactly what you're kind of seeing in front of you at that moment in time. Unless you're just playing it back passively. If you've got to interact with it in any way, once you're past that 20 or 30 milliseconds, it's quite difficult sometimes.
Totally. We separate, we use 2 different machines for this reason, which I will say now that in the years between with Apple Silicon and stuff, it's getting less and less necessary. But at the time, at the first time we separate E4L runs, encodes the Ambisonics, and we just send that out of sound card to a back-end machine that receives that and then does all the speaker decoding. It is amazing how fast this stuff develops. So 5-6 years ago, that was definitely necessary from a latency point of view to split the CPU load. Now it's often not really necessary, but it does just reduce. It's nice in that it just reduces risk. And then that lets us do some other things where we have that. For instance, if we have multiple people performing at a show, we can have that back-end machine just sort of fade out somebody's input, put on some field recording transition thing while somebody else switches their computer. Yeah, so it's helpful from a production workflow perspective as well.
If somebody, and to some extent we already talked about that, but if somebody wants to contribute, is the best way to reach out to you? Kind of how do you want?
The Facebook group or info is on the website, envelop.us. Loads of info there. I will pitch right now. We are in our winter fundraiser at the moment. We have a membership program and take donations as a nonprofit, all tax deductible for people in the US. So envelop.us/memberships has info on that. People in the Bay Area, there's perks related to that for coming to real events, but otherwise also sort of access to streaming stuff. But yeah, envelop.us is a place to go. Everything is on there. Email addresses to send things in, whether it's content or asking about events. We do also some like private and custom events in Bay Area if people are interested in that, bringing in their own material or just hosting a social event. So there's lots of avenues.
This is everything for today. Once again, if you want to see the entire discussion that Sam Hawking and I had with Mark Slee, I invite you to hop over to our podcast channel, Spatial Audio Monthly, link in the description below. As always, if you have any questions or comments, please use the comment section below or join our Discord community. Embed link is in the description below as well. And with that being said, see you at the next video.